this evening. My name is Joe Schaller. I'm an associate professor of communication, and I'm thrilled to be joined by Lyle Mueller, who's recently retired as the editor and executive director of Iowa Watch, the Iowa Center for Public Affairs Journalism, Zach Kucharski, who's the executive editor of the Gazette, and Dr. Richard Barrett, who's a professor of political science here. I'll give these gentlemen a chance to introduce themselves a bit more completely, but before we get going, I want to recognize that this is the anniversary of the drafting of the U.S. Constitution, and that's why we celebrate Constitution Day on this particular date. And what we are going to have a discussion about tonight is how the First Amendment, which is a vital part of that Constitution, is related to the political discourse we in and how it affects the upcoming 2020 election. And the event is kindly sponsored by two student groups here, and I want to recognize those two student groups. The first one is the Law and Politics Club. I know, Emma, I think you're the president of the Law and Politics Club. Emma, if you please stand up and be recognized. The second student group, and you're lucky because a photographer just showed up with a camera, so. Are you here for marketing and communication or for the Mount Mercy Times?
Marketing and communication.
Oh, so no, you're not you're in your newspaper role. The other group that is sponsoring tonight's event is the Mount Mercy Times, which is the student newspaper of Mount Mercy University. And if you are a staff member or editor of the Mount Mercy Times, would you please stand up? The reporter who's covering it tonight did not recognize herself as a staff member, but we'll just let that slide. Anyway, my name is Joe Schaller. I'm an associate professor of communication. Before I became a professor here at Mount Mercy University, I had been a business journalist for 10 years covering the banking industry, and before that I was a newspaper editor and newspaper reporter in central Missouri. So throughout my career, I've been very much a fan of the First Amendment. The First Amendment is important to me, and I think important to all of us, and I'm pleased to be here tonight to talk about the state of the First Amendment today and what it means in our election. Now I'll let the panelists kind of give themselves a brief introduction. Lyle?
Yeah, I'm Lyle Mueller, and the Iowa Center for Public Affairs Journalism that I've been heading until the end of August when I retired and then developed longer work days than I had at work. It is a nonprofit, nonpartisan news organization that exists to do in-depth investigative journalism in collaboration with media partners, including the Gazette, but also to train college students to do this with a high ethical level. And so it's a real challenge for the students when they get there. They want to be journalists, but they are surprised when they find out how hard it is to do journalism. And the hardest part of journalism is checking your assumptions and making sure that you are fact-checking instead of building on some sort of assumption that you've made. But they have wonderful privileges, and all you have to do is take a look at other countries to understand what type of privileges we have here in the United States and the importance and the responsibility of being a free press. A couple of years ago, I was able to go on a trip to Turkey, and I met with some journalists there, and there was a lot of heavy state control in Turkey. And not only that, Turkey is the world leader in jailing journalists. You wouldn't think that, but it has a horrible record of the way it treats journalists. And some of the people that I met there were arrested and put in prison during the uprising a couple of years ago. So it's very sobering to have met people doing journalism that's critical of the government and now knowing that they're in prison while I'm here still able to do this work. And the worst thing people can say to me is, we don't want you to do that, or worse, that you're the enemy of the people and all that type of thing.
Well, my name is Zach Kucharski. I'm the executive editor of the Gazette downtown. And the Gazette is an employee-owned organization. We're in our 136th year. In terms of media ownership, we're fairly unique in that we're one of three employee-owned news organizations in the country. And so we Telegraph Herald, and then Attic Communications, which is the Daily Herald in Chicago, is the other. And so we make our decisions locally, and we have to live with the decisions we make. So that's a blessing and a challenge in today's media landscape. I've had the privilege of being with the Gazette organization through my entire professional career. I started as an intern and have grown up through the organization, which provides an interesting So I'm ultimately responsible for context and everything having to do with content. So how our reporters gather information, how we use records, how we go about the reporting that we do, and ultimately responding to concerns about accuracy, as well as deciding what stories do we use resources to pursue. So it's a fun and challenging job. Lyle hired me to do that actually when he was there, and it's been a true honor to kind of grow up and do that. I'm originally from Chicago, went to the University of Iowa, and the rest of this kind of was great.
Hi, I'm Richard Barrett. I'm a professor of political science here at Mount University. So I teach classes that cover American politics, comparative politics, constitutional law, international relations. Before becoming a professor here, I taught at the University of Southern California, and before becoming a professor at all, I was an attorney for a little while and practiced. First, I worked for a federal court, then I worked for the Department of Justice, and then I worked briefly in the U.S. Senate. But now I enjoy my time with students.
All right, I'm going to do what I hope is a fairly brief presentation that sort of sets the stage for the discussion that we're going to have. And then I'm going to sit down with these gentlemen. We're going to raise and ruminate about some issues. As we go from topic to topic, I would invite you, if you want to this will be a First Amendment zone tonight. I'm not going to try and stop you. To ask whatever question you have, make whatever additional comment you want to make. I would like this to be a fairly open-ended conversation between us, and not just us yakking at you about what our thoughts are. First Amendment is supposed to promote a free discourse, and we'll aim for a respectful but free discourse here tonight as we talk about what it means. Okay, the title of our presentation tonight, if you can keep it, the First Amendment and the election of 2020, comes from a famous quote by Benjamin Franklin. And the original Constitution of the United States did not have a list of individual rights within it. Nonetheless, every state constitution, colonial constitution at the time, listed something that was very much like that. It came from British philosophy that Franklin would have been familiar with. His quote, by the way, is an answer to a woman that asked him when he left the Constitutional Convention, will we have a monarchy or a republic? And his quick answer was a republic if you can keep it. And I think that all of us would recognize that that First Amendment is an important part of the way in which we organize our culture and society to try and keep. The marketplace of ideas is actually a fairly modern formulation of a very old idea. It comes from the mid-19th century, which of course postdates Franklin by about 100 years. It's from a famous British thinker named John Stuart Mill. But several hundred years before, John Milton in I can never pronounce it, Areopagitica? Areopagitica, thank you. And it's nice to be at a university. There's an English professor in the room when you need one. Starting at the time of the British Civil War, there was sort of a fringe radical idea in Britain that there should be freedom of information so that governing people can make rational decisions and choices. And so even though if the phrase marketplace of ideas is a bit more contemporary, that theory of an openness of information is a theory that the gentleman who wrote the founding documents for this country would have been very familiar with and talk a lot about. And at the time of the end of the Revolution, signing of the Treaty of Ghent, I think I got the town wrong, but anyway, when the Revolution ended, the colonies first organized themselves in something called the Articles of Confederation. It turned out it did not work very well. There was a lot of confusion, a weak central government, and so the government at the time asked for the states to send members to a convention, and they were tasked with fixing the Articles of Confederation. When they got together, they met in secret in Philadelphia. They decided to heck with it, and they rewrote a completely new plan for the government of the United States. And during the writing of that plan and the battle to ratify that plan, because it was controversial at the time, political factions free trade within this new nation. The anti-federalists were more concerned with individual liberties, and the federalists were sort of on top at the beginning of the republic, although he never really joined either of the parties. The first president, George Washington, was kind of recognized as a federalist. And but after the Constitution had been written and was submitted to the states to be ratified, there was a knockdown, drag-out fight, right, over whether it would be ratified or not. And it was not assured that it would be ratified. And it was during that year after it was written and before it was ratified that especially James Madison, who was one of the Federalists, said, you know, this new Congress, as soon as we elect it, they should come up with a Bill of Rights. And so the Bill of Rights became part of the political compromise that allowed this new Constitution to be ratified. Interestingly enough, little historic side note, I'm sorry, I can't help myself. I don't know if you know this, but there were originally 12 articles in the Bill of Rights, and the last 10 of them got ratified. And so what we think of today as the First Amendment was honestly at the time period the Third Amendment. Anyway, we're talking today about the First Amendment, which of all of the amendments in the Bill of Rights is probably the most important in terms of exchange of information, making political decisions, governing ourselves as a self-governing people. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or the right of people peaceably to assemble and petition the government for a redress of grievances. Okay? It's interesting that there are distinct rights. The rights don't belong to me or to Zach or to Lyle. They are rights of citizens. You have as much freedom of the press as those of us at work as journalists have. And it's interesting that it's kind of grouped, if you think about it, 3 ways. Where they put semicolons, right? The first grouping, the first 2 freedoms. The government is not going to set up a religion. The government is not going to prevent you from practicing your own religion. And so the first freedom is freedom of religion. There's 2 distinct freedoms, but they're both acting around religion. And by the way, under our system of government, a right indicates its negative when it has to do with expression, right? So freedom of religion and freedom to practice religion implicitly also gives you the right not to practice religion if you don't want to. The next grouping of rights, abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, note that they're together. They're thought of very much as the same thing. They're the way in which information can be exchanged and ideas exchanged. And free speech and freedom of the press belongs to all of us. Now, what they meant by press was not the Gazette. There wasn't anything like that in the country at the time period. Newspapers existed, but they were very different, very partisan, very extreme to our eyes and ears now. But nonetheless, we should, as a people, have access to those weird little extreme publications without the government telling us that we can't. It's kind of the idea here. In fact, I think one of the reasons that those 2 are linked is that most people wouldn't have enough money to subscribe to a newspaper. They would actually experience a newspaper at the tavern, and it would be passed around and read out loud and discussed there. All right, so religion, expression, and you can get together and tell the government you don't like it if you want to. All right, so important freedoms. Some things to note about those freedoms. Right? Some things that we want to keep in mind as we discuss them. They protect you only against government action. Congress shall make no law. That doesn't say anything about what your employer will do or what Facebook will do. Right? It's protecting you from government restraint on your expression. It doesn't protect you from anybody's reaction to that expression. And nor does it protect you from if you post something bad about your employer on Facebook, the courts have said, yes, you can be fired for that. Right? So freedom of expression refers to government action. In fact, in the original conception of the First Amendment, these were restricting limits on the federal government. Right? And for complicated legal reasons, that's not true anymore. Today, the Bill of Rights covers all American government at all levels. It also is true that although the language of the amendment seems absolute, Congress shall make no law, that's not really true, because it has to be balanced against other rights that people have, and sometimes there's a conflict between them. For example, if you use expression to unlawfully extract goods from somebody, that's called fraud. Right? He's lying to somebody so you can get money from them. That's not legal expression, and that's not protected by this First Amendment. We have many issues, many of which we're going to talk about tonight, that affect sort of the state of the First Amendment in our body politic, right? I think that we, as a people, don't always understand it or support it. Don't always know what it means, don't always know what it limits and what it doesn't limit. And it's very easy for us to be critical of speech or expression that we don't like. We today exchange a lot of our information online and social media, and social media is built to try and please us and draw our attention and keep our time there, because those are marketing companies that are making their money from advertising. What that means is that they echo back what we like. And so the marketplace of ideas on social media is more, some people call it the walled gardens of information rather than the marketplace of ideas. This information, sometimes deliberately, can be spread easily online and have a big impact on our body politic. That was my summertime reading. It was a bit of a hefty thing to read, but it was very interesting, very scary at the same time. News media has shifted, and since the recession of 2008, the stats at local newspapers have gone down a great deal. Those shifts affect the quality of the work that we're seeing, probably more than anything that we worry about in terms of bias. And in our culture right now, because of a lot of legitimate anxiety over all kinds of economic and political things, there's a lack of trust in any kind of institution. And finally, I love Lyle's shirt. The current state of our discourse about what freedom of expression means and about the people that are trying to give us information is, I think, something that is challenging our information environment. But in the end, I hope, we're not at the end yet, almost at the end of this PowerPoint, I promise. But in the end, I hope that we come to something like Jefferson's conclusion. He wrote this letter from Paris while he was in Paris to a Virginian who was in the Continental Congress, and famously said, "We're left to me to decide whether we should have a government without newspapers or newspapers without a government. I should not hesitate a moment to refer the latter because freedom of expression is so important to him." He was an anti-federalist. And so, without further ado, we're going to begin our discussion about the current state of the First Amendment, freedom of expression, and what it means as we look forward to the election of 2020. And so I'm just leaving the text of the First Amendment up there for reference as we discuss. And came up with a list of sort of topics that we as a panel will kind of address and give our thoughts about. But again, as we move from topic to topic, feel free to interject thoughts and questions and engage in a dialogue here. And the first topic that I have is how has our era of social media changed the news media's role in elections?
You want to start by telling you that when I was in college, I took a philosophy class, and the first question was, how many angels dance on the head of a pin? And the answer is, first we have to determine if angels exist. And I think of that with this question, because you have to determine, what do we mean by the media? Do the media exist? What do we mean by that phrase? Do we mean the media that we've been used to consuming? Broadcast television, your local newspaper, national newspapers, wire services, radio? Or do we mean the new kind of media that emerged? Bloggers, people who have websites, people who are commentators, Or do we mean the newer kind of media, which would be the stuff you get on your iPhone? Or do we mean even newer? I'm tweeting out 140 or 280 characters, and that therefore is news. Well, some people try. So you have to determine, do the news media exist in the way we thought about them? And my thought is that there are all these different people in this stew. So I just get a kick out of one particular side of the political spectrum that criticizes the media, yet they're doing it in the media. I think what we're seeing now is just a broader spread of information. And so the challenge is, what about those trusted media journalists? How are they covering this? Because they're covering it differently than advocates and people who just are interested. And I think the challenge is really difficult now, but it's not a bad thing. Journalist work is being vetted by citizens. And it's being vetted in a public way instead of the old way, which was in people's living rooms, at the kitchen table, or at a bar. And so I always think of Twitter as bar talk, except we all get to hear it. I think the challenge then is how are we covering? We're doing more fact-checking, more vetting. I believe there is more fact-checking and more vetting now than was done before, and it was being done before. The big difference is there are fewer reporters. There are about 40% fewer reporters in the United States than there were 25 years ago. And so that's the other thing. And so we're not only doing more vetting and more fact checking because we're being challenged, but we're doing it with fewer people.
I agree with what is a news media organization, and I think that if we're not every news media organization does things ethically. Not every media organization is what I think most people would even think of as a media organization. So that's a blogger account. I think the other thing with social media is, it's created an echo chamber of thought, which an algorithm can deliver, depending on which form of social media you're in. Or you can identify and follow people that look like you, and it's a tool. At the end of the day, and it can block other thoughts from entering your stream. Journalists can have this problem as well as consumers. And so I think that social media has also then increased the amount of points that people have to sort through in order to find that information, which has become harder to do, both because of technology in terms of how it's presented, and also because the amount of it that's made to look like news isn't. And so I think that it has had an impact in a lot of ways, that some good and some bad.
Two of you have made a comment about information. Please define information in the context of what you're talking about.
In the first instance that I'm talking about, in other words, the spread of, I'm talking about anything we want to know that we care about. And that's what I'm talking about that gets spread to social media. And in anything we care about, there can be news. In other words, if someone tweets that an airplane has landed on the Hudson River and shows a picture of that to all of its followers before ABC, NBC, CBS, local news media have gotten to the crash, is that news or is it information? I think it's both. And by the way, that's a real example. That's what started really Twitter as a news gathering tool. The Hudson crash, the Sully crash, the first publication of that was someone took a picture of it on Twitter, said there's a plane on the Hudson, and at the same time, television stations in New York were saying we've heard rumors that there's a plane in the Hudson, and we have crews going there so that we can confirm this. To deliver then the second definition, which would be news, which is information that matters to you that could affect your norm. These are that is news, and sometimes it gets delivered by non-journalists.
I would agree with Lyle's definitions, and I think that sometimes information can be untrue. It could be something spread for a variety of reasons, whether it's someone believes something happened, or it's malicious. And so information is kind of a detail prior to the determination of, newsworthiness.
Joe, can you remind us the precise question you have?
The question I pose is, how has our era of social media changed the news media's role in the elections?
The era of social media. I don't know. I think on the whole we tend to exaggerate in our own minds how much it has changed things. I think that a lot of things were there before and they've been magnified. In particular, I think one thing that's stayed constant is if we watch how citizens behave, they tend to get their news almost by accident. That people don't sort of actively seek out the news, but they get the news when they're on the way to doing something else. So hearing people talk on a bus or at work, now it's more often that people sort of see a news story or see a discussion among friends on Facebook or something else. But I think it's still, the vast majority of Americans don't seek out the news and try to actually sort through it at all. For those that do, I think it's harder to find and to discriminate because there's so much more to sort through, and I think that makes a big difference for people trying to understand what's going on. And it's also become harder to distinguish the credibility of different sources. It used to be that the cost of putting news out meant that people who had the resources to spread their news very far were relatively few, and that kept them, that established a certain amount of credibility when there were 3 or 4 news networks delivering the nightly news, and the nightly news is the way that most Americans heard about the news. The major news networks were the one sort of gatekeepers and provided a certain amount of authenticity or credibility to the news that they broadcast. And today, it's hard to sift through the different possible sources of news. I guess one thing I've noticed, especially working with students, is it's become harder to distinguish between what's being put forward as news and what's being put forward as opinion. One of the things that I regularly find with students in class is when we start discussing media bias in the news or what sort of bias we see, a lot of times, not a lot of times, always, lots of students in a class, being more than half, I think initially, will point to an opinion piece that's identified as an opinion piece and say, this is biased. And I say, yes, it's supposed to be biased. But at the same time, I'm very sympathetic, because if you bear that in mind as you go around the internet and look at different articles, you'll find that it's not nearly as easy to identify what's an editorial or an opinion piece and what isn't. And I think that the news organizations, to some degree, have intentionally blurred the line because it's a way of attracting more viewers. And I think at the same time, there's a certain amount of carelessness, or we don't have the same established format. Like, where do you put the thing that says editorial? And there's not a set of editorial pages quite as clean as used to be. Other part of that could be done. Anyway, so I guess those would be the main things. I would only add in, without going into great detail, that while the Soviet Union sought to influence American public opinion by spreading news of sorts, the social media has made it easier to do that and made it harder to distinguish between propaganda spread by a foreign opponent and something that's domestic.
Yeah, I think that those are all very interesting observations that I would agree with. And I know that there is a tendency, I think, to look at the downside of something that's new, especially if you're old like me. But I do think that one of the things that the social media environment has done is that it has allowed a lot more voices to become part of the public conversation. I had exactly the same experience with students, by the way, and it is an interesting challenge for media people to think about, is that they don't distinguish typically between a New York Times news story and a New York Times opinion column, so then they got something from the New York Times and it means the same thing. And I do think that that partly goes to many people not being in the newspaper habit. I think if you were used to looking at a physical newspaper, then those labels, which are subtle online, mean more to you. And if you're not used to that, then it all looks the same to you, and you don't quite understand that there's a distinction being made.
I just want to add one thing, and I'll do it quickly because I know you don't want to choose a draw on one question, which we obviously could. But I think the format, what you said about newspapers makes total sense because there's a hierarchy that exists at front page, second page, weather page, opinion page. When we look at our phones, all of those stories look the same. There's nothing there that distinguishes. So you can see a headline that says, Trump out of whack. And you look, and it's an opinion piece. Or it's a post report about someone's opinion piece. So I think the format that we're looking at, it changes everything. Iowa Watch stories, which are very small red stories on our website, still look the same as Washington Post stories in the Twitter feed.
Okay, we'll move on to the next topic. Unless there's anybody want to make a comment on what we said so far before we move on? Thank you, Bob, for looking in there. We're looking ahead to the 2020 election. In fact, in Iowa, the 2020 election has been going on for quite some time. And I think that when we look at the next election, it might be useful for us to take a look and see what happened in the previous election. And so I would sort of like the panel to reflect a little bit on their own observations of this amorphous term, the media. What I mean, I guess, by the media in this context is how did major news organizations in the United States do? How did they fare in terms of how well they covered the election of 2016 versus how well did consumers consume information about the election of 2016 and maybe what that means for 2020? How's that for a small question?
Here's a real quick thumbnail. After the 2016 election, a lot of national news organizations on both coasts needed to come to the Midwest to find out what this thing was that put Trump over the top as though it were some unusual third eye. And they were doing, and I remember someone from the Chicago Tribune on Twitter saying, go do your anthropology project on us. We know what the Midwest is like because we report on it every day. And so Trump winning probably wasn't a lot of it, but it wasn't as big a surprise to people in Northwest Iowa and Southwest Iowa that it was in New York City. And that's because their local media covered what was going on. The Cedar Rapids Gazette covered politics and what voters were saying. The Des Moines Register covered it. Television stations had it. And so we saw all of these folks. And while there was a shock value there of a talk show host becoming a president of the United States, there wasn't a shock value, I believe, in people who were concerned about jobs, taxes, and regulation, because that's what voters were telling reporters in the Midwest. I think the big thing that went on in 2016 and probably will in 2020 is that the national organizations like Washington Post, New York Times, Politico Now, and Wall Street Journal still will drive, and particularly television, which is what people say is the number one source of news. Television will drive the narrative instead of some of this local reporting, and a lot of the local reporting is happening.
I think that there were several instances where, what eventually happened pointed out some of the weaknesses in media. And this is not something that is new, but there's the ability to get into the horse race coverage of just what's happening, who said what, and very cursory, not diving into anything. It's been a problem that's been around for decades. However, it took on a new meaning in 2016 in terms of, when you're focused only on the horse race, and then the definition of what is news is the outrageous or the unusual, and then you have a candidate that engages in that regularly. That gets a different amount of coverage than anyone else in the race. And so the Shorenstein Center at Harvard did an analysis. I think Trump got 63% of the coverage, from the time that he declared his candidate to the time time that he got the nomination. And that was a crowded field with Republican candidates. That 37% was the percentage of the next challenger in that party. So that points it to a little bit of a problem in terms of what the media or what news outlets, primarily in television, were chasing. There is a lot of great local reporting that's going on, and that usually gets beyond the horse race coverage. But I will say, when we, as media outlets, allow horse race coverage to be the dominant venue, not look at policy and some of those things, it allows people to stop talking about that. When we aren't pressing candidates for policy discussion, but are focused on what did candidate A say today at the campaign stop, and that's we're repeating a stump speech that gets said 40 times across the state. Well, that's a problem, and so it really takes a lot of effort to dive in and get to policy discussions, which is truly what the person that you're electing is going to spend their time or should spend their time doing. And so I think that when you look at what the media did, it was a storm that kind of pointed out a few weaknesses of things that have been going on for quite a while.
We don't normally grade the news media or the consumers and their consumption of media. I guess what I would say is that it depends on what they're trying to do, how you grade them, and some of them are clearly focusing first and foremost on making profit. Some of them have different visions. Most of the people consuming the news didn't intend to consume the news and only did it by accident. So I think that changes things. I think one thing people critique with the 2016 election are the polling, is the polling that was done before the election. But if you look at the details, isn't as bad as a lot of people think it was. It was just slightly wrong in places where it only had to be slightly wrong to make a big difference. I think that, looking back, one of the things that becomes clear is when you have news organizations that operate for profit combined with citizens who don't seek out the news but who get it by accident, a candidate who is especially good at getting to people who aren't seeking out the news has a big advantage over other candidates. Aside from that, I guess I would say that I tend to agree that there's a way in which, I think Lyle mentioned this, that there's a certain narrative that is driven that I think was a little bit misleading. I think if you watched major news programs or if you watched nightly comedy shows, it was really easy to get this sense of the story that Trump was not a real candidate, he wasn't a real contender. And I think that even people like Stephen Colbert were sort of felt safe having fun talking to Trump in a way that they wouldn't now, were he to go back on their show. So I think that maybe changed the way that they handled him differently than they otherwise would have. And I think there's been some discussion about the fact that when you have the number of journalists and reporters decreasing, the number of people involved in journalism decreasing around the country, that the places where they're left tend to be on the east and west coast and in the big cities, and that just naturally leads to a certain distortion of what the American people as a whole are thinking.
An interesting facet of the 2016 election. We all know what reporters on staffs were assigned to cover Donald Trump at the beginning of the campaign, don't you? At a lot of places, it was the entertainment reporter, not a political reporter. And then when it came time to have someone cover Trump as serious news, the least experienced reporter on the staff would get that assignment. And that's why you have a lot of people, including a couple from Iowa, whom I know, who all of a sudden became White House reporters at the age of 24, 25, and 26 because they had covered Trump. So that was going on as well.
Yeah, that's an interesting tradition and phenomenon. If you're covering a campaign, to some extent you have a stake in that campaign, because if the candidate you cover wins, you've got a better shot at becoming the White House correspondent for the news outlet.
What a reward it's been.
Yeah.
So, today, in the campaign, we got to see and hear immediately on television what was happening, what he was saying, happening, it sort of made the role of the traditional media a moot point. There was no filtering, there was no fact checking. That was history already by the time we had all heard firsthand what they said, what everybody regarded, and had to say in response to it. How do you cope with that in a traditional media if we're seeing the real raw action firsthand in real time?
Yeah, I think that's a real challenge. And I was going to say that Trump, I don't know that he represents the future, but he does represent a different kind of politician. He's a creature of this moment. He's not just an individual, he represents a culmination of some trends. He exists in some context. And we know from the past that there have been politicians that change our politics because of their understanding of the media of their time, right? Starting, I think, with Abraham Lincoln, because Lincoln had a Washington press corps that for the first time because of the Civil War, and he understood the importance of being quoted and talking directly with reporters. And when we get to the radio era, it was Franklin Roosevelt, who was really, more than a decade into that era, but was the first president to really understand how broadcasting would change things and how he could use it. And Kennedy and Reagan, opposite ends of the political spectrum, but they're both TV presidents, and they both understood how to use television as a medium to try and achieve their political goals. Barack Obama we are surprised by Trump in a way, but we forget how surprised we were by Barack too. He was a junior senator from Illinois, the first African-American elected president of the United States, whose election was a bit surprising, partly fueled by he and his campaign's understanding of social media and use of social media. Trump was a reality TV star. And whatever else you can say about him, whatever his pluses and his minuses, he behaves like a reality TV star. And what that means in terms of where we go from here in our politics, I'm not sure. I don't know if he's an aberration or a sign of a different kind of discourse to come. I know what I hope, but I don't know what the truth is. So anyway, that's an interesting point. You're right. The traditional role of the media, maybe one of the reasons why we needed 40% more reporters 20 years ago, was that we wouldn't know what was going on if they didn't tell us. Whereas today, we often can see what's going on directly and immediately without a filter. Unfortunately, because information is digital, we don't always know what we're really seeing, and we don't always understand it. And I do think that there's still sort of a contexting role that's very important in communication. And that's where I think the role of the journalist today comes in. I don't need to tell you that there's a light on a house, right? Or, to reference, I think, something that was broken on Twitter by Lyle here, that a meteorite was struck in Wisconsin, right? You told me that story. What does it mean? Why did it happen? If there's a reason for it happening, what narrative is it part of the context of? What's true or not true and what somebody asserted? Those, I think, are still important roles that if we were paying attention to professional good journalism, that journalism will help fulfill for us.
I just want to add a point. You don't have to look much further than an internet meme to see that people can manipulate photos and video. And that's going to be, at least one of the other, is that authentic? Did that happen as it's portrayed to happen? And that's something that, we've seen a couple instances of it, even locally in some of the stories, people trying to, change the context of what happened. But that's something that I think you have to also be critical thinkers when you're looking at some of that. And, I think with the shark that appears in every, water photo all over the internet, that's fake. And so people share that without even thinking because it's entertaining or made them laugh. And, oh, did you see this? And it becomes to others news. And that's a scary place to be.
Okay, I'm going to pick one more of my topics here, and then if you guys want to take a look at topics and see what goes next, I don't want to completely dominate this discussion, especially since we don't have a lot of more time left. One of the things I have listed here has to do with that point of that the First Amendment was written in a context that imagined a self-governing democratic republic, imagined an informed voting base that was making decisions based on information that they received. And the articulation of the marketplace of ideas, or the ideal of the marketplace of ideas, is that you don't limit expression, because if you let truth and falsehood battle it out, people are going to choose truth. Right? It's sort of based on a kind of classical conception of the rationality of human beings. I like that idea, but I guess I would have to criticize that idea a little bit, because we know that people are just as driven by emotion as they are driven by rationality. I guess I sort of wonder, what does that marketplace of ideas mean to us today, and how do we grapple with the fact that sometimes when truth and falsehood are out there in the marketplace together, people will be learning to like sharpen the water and find it easier to believe the falsehood if it fits into some narrative that they're already buying into.
Well, I think with an audience or a story, you're always going to be talking through the filter of their beliefs, attitudes, and values. And so what you do is you just try to tell the truth as best as possible. And this is what we do. This is what we teach the students at the Center for Public Affairs Journalism who work with us, is that you're transparent about your reporting. Where did you get the information? We can show a link to that now. What makes you think this is true? I was talking with a reporter at the Daily Island today. He had reported about how the audience reacted, or the audience was enthusiastically behind what one of the political candidates was telling me. I said, "Oh, how do you know that?" He said, "Well, they were applauding, and they would hoot and holler every time they made certain points." I said, "Why don't you say they were hollering and hooting? Because once you say they reacted enthusiastically, we think you're coloring that through your lens, and then people with a belief, attitude, and value that says if you produce made-up news, it's going to disregard this. But if you tell them they applauded loudly and wildly, now I actually know what happened." And so I think transparency is one big way on what we're doing for reporting. Telling people where we got the information. Here's something I've noticed from some of the national news organizations like Washington Post and New York Times. They used to quote unnamed sources, and of course then you could say, "Well, you've made that up. That's not a real source. We don't even know if that's someone at the White House. We don't know if that's someone who's even in the know." But now what I'm noticing in their stories, when they're quoting unnamed sources, they're actually doing reporting, which they've always done before, but they're being more transparent about it. They say, according to 7 people who were in the conversation or had knowledge of the conversation. And I think that can go a longer way towards discerning the truth.
I think the transparency is a key piece. The more that we can explain how we do what we do, why we do what we do as a media outlet, the more that we can help people understand the information. But if we can use some of the analytics and some of the tools that are out there to actually make ourselves better. At the end of the day, the more that we can explain what we're doing, to who we talk to, and if we name them or if we attribute something, we have to find how many there are. I think that makes our reporting stronger and more difficult to review. I think also there's a certain amount of daring that's going on right now. We look at the Alabama weather forecast and whether Hurricane Dorian was supposed to hit. That's someone who is trying to, are we okay with that? And that's become a situation where the news story became as much about the behavior and the attempts to quiet people in terms of providing information as it is. And I think that that's something that the media has a responsibility to cover that story. But I think that that's also we okay when people are intentionally trying to manipulate facts, or is that behavior that we want to don't? I wouldn't anticipate, being okay with that as an editor if I knew a reporter were doing some of those things. That's happened. They get fired. And so that's a concern. So from a consumer standpoint, placing into that is really.
So I think we're on the question about the marketplace of ideas, and in particular with the possibility of fake news. I guess I want to start by drawing back on something Bill mentioned earlier about how the news coverage has changed over the course of the country's history. It's a very different environment for democracy than it was. The Federalist Papers, which we now have students sometimes study some of as essays in college classes, were newspaper articles written to the general public. And almost 100 years later, 80 years later, Abraham Lincoln and Stephen Douglas had debates that lasted 3 hours, where the first person spoke for 60 minutes, the second one spoke for an hour and a half, and the third one spoke at a rebuttal for 30 minutes. And they drew crowds of 15,000, even though they didn't have microphones to help people hear. Eventually, we moved to sound bites, and now we have tweets. And I think that what you have to do when you're asking this question, does marketplace of ideas work, especially in the era of fake news, is you have to really question what it means to have a democracy. Can democracy really work, and if so, how? And what are the conditions that democracy requires? That might make us want to question whether or not the First Amendment should be revised in some way. The danger is we're not sure how to revise it. We can look to other countries who have a different understanding of freedom of speech, even though they still call it freedom of speech. And there are other countries, Germany, to some degree Canada, that think of freedom of speech as the government protecting a certain sphere of discourse and making sure that even people who don't have the most means still have a role or a voice in public debate. So I think that's something we have to consider. But when it comes to the possibility of fake news, especially say fake videos, for me the sort of nightmare I have is imagining somebody, especially in the 5-10 years in the future, when it's easier and easier to fake videos that the FBI can't verify or review quickly. It also probably means that the FSB, the former KGB, can't either. What do we do if there's a video of President Trump announcing a first strike nuclear attack on North Korea or China or Russia? And what if it just happens that video of President Trump announcing a first strike nuclear attack on Russia is accompanied by some Iranian missiles going into Russia? We don't just have to worry about the public being, fake. We have to worry about, to some degree, our adversaries falling for fake news. And in the end, this seems to mean that we have to establish possibly, additional back channels of communication and other things. But there are countries like France that are saying, look, in order to deal with fake news, we need a more thoughtful electorate. And we have to teach about fake news in classes, and we have to have middle school and high school classes where students learn how to determine the credibility of the source. This is something we're working on here at Mercy too, but we're not doing it as a country as a whole. There has been a major initiative to try to get students to be a little bit better about determining the quality of the news sources that they're reading.
I guess there's some comfort in the fact that whatever else happens, 2020 won't be a repeat of 2016. The only nice thing about history is that there's the old saying that those that don't study history are bound to repeat it. There's some truth there because we tend to repeat old mistakes. But we are not going into 2020 being surprised at the possibility of somebody somewhere externally trying to influence us. It's become part of the norm that we'll be on the lookout for. Do you have a comment on the thing?
Yes. Two things. When I was a boy, I delivered the Davenport Democrat, which is one cease to exist. It was a very small newspaper compared to the Republican edition that went out. And when I was in my late 30s, moved to a town where there were two newspapers, but they were published at the same company. And now we're lucky to have one newspaper. And I wonder two things about that. One, if there are two newspapers in town, one can sort of check the other, and call the other one out. And there was a time when reporters would race to break the story, to be sure that our newspaper got the story before the other one did. So there's not that kind of check on quality. The other thing strikes me that as a result of there just being one newspaper town is self-censorship. It's what doesn't get published. For example, a few weeks ago, some activists in Iowa City uncovered that Rockwell Collins had huge contracts with ICE and Immigration Service for doing surveillance, providing surveillance material and other equipment. I believe the Press Citizen published that, and the Morning Register did, but we didn't hear anything about that in the Gazette, the hometown of Rockwell Collins. So that it strikes me that there's a tendency of a one-paper news town one newspaper town for that newspaper then to become a kind of surely for the community and not maybe shy away from things that might be embarrassing, sexually embarrassing to a large employer or to an influential citizen. So those are things that strike me that influence the quality and veracity of the news that we get.
Right, and for many communities, one of the concerns that we have right now in this country is that there are a spreading phenomenon known as the news desert, where previously, if you had a town of a certain size, it was inevitable that you would probably have a newspaper located in that town because of the economic shifts in the media. That's not true anymore, and you can have towns of quite substantial size where there isn't a local newsroom that's providing much coverage of the politics in that town. I heard just yesterday a very interesting NPR story, and I don't remember the name of the town. I think it was a town of 60,000 that did not have a newspaper. And part of what they were thinking about was whether the library could somehow step in and become a news outlet in that town. The nature of media is shifting a lot. And we're long past the era when most towns might have had two leading newspapers. And certainly that has an impact. I'm not sure that there's less information for us, but recognizing what the credible information is might be a challenge. Zach, you're an editor of a newspaper, and I wonder what your thoughts are.
There are a variety of factors that go into what stories that we cover, which stories we have resources to, what the plan of the day is, and when you pivot and readjust. I think that there's more collaboration among news organizations these days than to some degree. I think there's kind of two competing philosophies. There's the race to be first, and then there's other organizations that will work together to collaborate to try and figure out information. I would say that our organization is certainly more, I would rather that we collaborate and get it right than race to be first and get it wrong. Because the product that we have is truly trust. If we deliver it in a newspaper, we deliver it on an online site. If we lose that, then we really aren't a viable product anymore. And so, there are lots of decisions that get made. In that, the particular situation about the Collins Aerospace, that was a situation where we didn't have rights to get at that story at the time. And so that's one of the switches of when we have syndicate agreements. We're going back to the Associated Press so that we can work with some of the Iowa newspapers better. We have a sharing arrangement in place with the Register. However, when a Iowa City Press citizen staffer writes a story, our agreement was null and void because we compete in that space in that market. And so that's something that can we pivot the resources to tackle a nuanced story or not. And so sometimes we have to make decisions to revisit a story a couple weeks later, and that's something that we do. And so there are a variety of factors that go into this and what resources you have available. And sometimes it's as simple as the reporter that would be knowledgeable about that is off to take their kid to college. And other times it's something that's more complex than that, or it's simply chasing another story. There are also times, as an editor, where I think that you have to make decisions, and that's not the Rockwell columns. We're not into this place to be cheerleaders for the local community. Certainly, we're not naive. When our community succeeds, we succeed. But part of our job is to be a watchdog, and so it's not my concern whether or not the mayor likes me, but it is my concern that we can be cordial and have a discussion about issues that are important to the community. And so those are important things that we have to maintain, and that's something that gets very difficult when you get some of that stuff that gets into play. Politics is a fickle beast, and it rears its head in different ways, especially at the local level, in terms of what people share, what people talk about, and what they don't.
Zach and I had the opportunity to actually, we had two newspapers now, and we experimented with this in Iowa City. By the way, the story you're talking about was written by one reporter and shared by two newspapers in the same chain. And so those types of dynamics exist. But we were in Iowa City, the Gazette tried to compete directly with Gannett in Iowa City with something called the Iowa City Gazette, and I was the editor, and Zach was one of our reporters. And I can tell you, we were going through the nails. The competition was amazing. It was the best era ever I can even Iowa City news history, because the press citizen was trying to outdo us, and we were trying to outdo them, and we read each other's papers, see what our successes and failures were. Excellent journalism was going on there, but the towns don't support them. Subscribers don't support them, advertisers don't support them, and while I too am idealistic about newspapers and journalism, I do believe that families, it's okay for them to have a living as they work at a newspaper. I think the argument about whether newspapers exist is the wrong argument. The argument that we should always be concerned about is whether good journalism exists.
Okay, we're getting well past 8 o'clock here, so we're going to draw things to a conclusion here soon. I'm going to ask the panel if there's any topic any member of the panel would like to discuss briefly, and then I want to give any kind of reaction or thoughts that you and the crowd might have before we're done here. So, Richard, I'm going to pass it to you and let you go first for once. Is there one of the topics that we have touched on that you'd like to raise?
Sure, since it's Constitution Day, I'll ask the question of the audience. So you have the First Amendment to the federal Constitution up on the slide. I suggested earlier that maybe we should revise or amend the First Amendment. And so I'll have you compare that with the Iowa section of the Iowa Constitution protecting liberty of speech and press. The way it states, somewhat differently, every person may speak, write, and publish his sentiments on all subjects, being responsible for the abuse of that right. No law shall be passed to restrain or abridge the liberty of speech or the press. In all prosecutions or indictments or libel, the truth may be given in evidence to the jury, and if it appears to the jury that the matter charged as libelous was true and was published with good motives and for justifiable ends, the party shall be acquitted. And this is it's somewhat different, and it's of course written somewhat later, but it's interesting to compare the two and consider the ways in which other countries handle freedom of the press differently, and wonder if we were writing from scratch now, how would we write the First Amendment? I don't know if I should give that to the audience or if I fellow panelists.
Wow. Where's Ben Franklin?
But alluding to the quote that Joe started with by Franklin, part of being a republic is always being involved in rewriting your founding documents to some degree or another.
Unless you're a strict constitutionalist. You know, I don't know how we would start from scratch. I think what's in place is really good. I think it's profound. I think it's amazing that it still exists all of these years later. In many ways, I'm amazed at a lot of the things that this experiment called our representative republic democracy is, that we've been able to exist because we believe in this ideal. Think about this. The Tea Party hated Barack Obama, wanted to get rid of him and Democrats. And how did the Tea Party do it? They did it with the constitutional process of election. Democrats and closet Republicans hate closeted Republicans who hate Donald Trump but don't want to upset what's going on with their party. How are they trying to get rid of him? Through the Constitution. And so I think the First Amendment is pretty good. There's vagueness there, and there are these fine things that get fine-tuned. So I don't know how I would start this. You know, the cynic in me says that Benjamin Franklin wanted the First Amendment so that he could just print his paper and get advertising and print on him, please. So, you know, I think that's always interesting too. But yeah, I don't know how I don't know how you
Yeah, Franklin was such an interesting character. He started his career in journalism with a hoax. He impersonated an elderly lady named Silence Dogood and perpetrated on his older brother who ran the newspaper, who didn't realize it was his snarky younger brother who was writing his columns. And oddly, you're absolutely right. One of the Franklin media history, among other things, is known as being one of the first profitable newspaper publishers in America, so that's probably what he was interested in. Anyway, I guess when I sort of sum things up and take a look at the language from Iowa, I would agree. We have some fundamental problems and some things that we as a society need to grapple with. I don't think that the language of the First Amendment is part of that problem. I think that we as an audience need to recognize that we construct a media environment these days, that if we're being measured online by Google algorithms, the choices that we make are consequential to the information that we see. And we can't always blame the media for not providing us with information if we're not seeking the information. It feels like things are bad in a generic way, but I think that that sense of the catastrophe, while I don't want to downplay it, it can also be overemphasized, that we tend to recognize the problems we face and don't see the good that social media is doing for us, the connections that help us maintain the voices that allow us in the public square that were not in the public square before. So I guess I'm not either an optimist or a pessimist. I think that there is a role for journalism. I'm not sure that that role continues in terms of newspapers, but there is a role for information. And honestly, I wouldn't write for this amendment. What I would do is undo the opposite. That's the difference.
Well, that's one nonprofit I would fund. By the way, federal schools are really cool because the guy in Hampton was involved.
I would tend to agree. I think the First Amendment is weathered and facing a number of challenges, and I think we will continue to do so. I think I would agree also that the media landscape, there's sources from which it's coming from. And the big critical thinking skills. Does this make sense? Or, what would other points of view be in this issue? And, the nature of an algorithm when news is delivered, when you click on what you like, and you just keep getting more of that, is that you lose the challenge that you put yourself in. Reading good journalism should make you uncomfortable. It should make you challenge your beliefs. That's something that if you have feeling uncomfortable, then you're probably only seeing the part of the story that you agree with. And that's something that, as consumers, all of us have a hand in looking for those other sources.
Yes. The reporter for the Mount Mercy County raises her hand.
On that note about comfortableness, have you heard the phrase of hate speech? If we were in this, we're in the situation of rewriting others' code, do you believe that would be a danger of infringing on the right of speech, or is that coming out in our generation? Well, our generation.
By that you mean the current effort to try and
Prevent people from saying their opinions if it hurts other people's feelings.
that's an ongoing challenge. It's always been a challenge. But part of the problem with hate speech, in my opinion, is that the expression of an idea is as important as the idea itself. Communication can be weaponized. In fact, we unfortunately see many models of it in our current political discourse. I personally don't see, I know that there's a particular political point of view, particular right-wing political point of view that sees efforts to prevent hate speech as being a threat to expression. But the kind of expression that it seems to be a threat to, it's not as if the theory or idea can be expressed. And as a communicator, a person that teaches writing, I recognize that the norms of language change constantly because cultural norms change constantly. And I don't share the reaction that somehow I'm being told not to refer to African Americans as Negroes, that should bother me. But the fact that the label changed, because the labels change all the time, right? That's a normal process. Yes, I think that that's an issue. It's certainly something to pay attention to. I do worry about the sense that students sometimes express that they feel like they can't express their ideas because they're worried about the reaction to that. But then I think becoming a mature adult is partly recognizing how do you express the idea without using language or terminology that's designed to offend or be exclusive.
I think the definition section of a hate crimes law would be amazingly out of control. How would you, on one person's hate speech is not someone else's? I think what you do instead is you focus on the act. Sometimes hate speech exposes an act that you didn't know existed that needs to be addressed.
Any other final questions or final topics that the audience would like to raise?
You had asked about modifying the First Amendment, and I wanted to remind you a way to say that freedom of speech and all of that, part of it will apply to the entire domain, not just the laws that Congress makes. For example, the court's resignation of Mr. President at Unity College here for voicing things that, why should that be prescribed? This is a government entity, by the way.
Now, that is a very interesting case.
So some way to do that so that if I'm working for Quaker Oats or something and I want to say this place sucks, then I don't get fired.
we are, as consumers, are searching for the truth, we need to read a variety of things. I feel betrayed by headlines. Headlines, oftentimes, from what I see, don't really connect with what's in the subject. So I feel betrayed by that as I'm trying to read. So comments, especially from anybody, I guess, do you struggle with that? If the headline is from the, I want to grab their attention perspective, rather than I want to show what's in the article from the media, there's two different ways of looking at it. I want the headline to show what's in the article.
The reward so often is trying to get traffic somehow. And it's sort of the Trump phenomenon. You say what you need to say in order to draw attention. Honestly, although I follow it, it's one of the apps, one of the news apps, and along with Reuters and Washington Post and things that I have on my phone. I find myself very disenchanted with CNN on that very topic. The CNN headline is often designed to draw me into the story and doesn't reflect what the story actually is. And I think that sort of clickbait headline thing, well, it's a problem. I also think that partly it could in the long run be self-selecting, because after a while you start to avoid it because you're expecting that they are deceiving you. And I think it was Zach who said that trust is really the point of the realm if you're actually in journalism.
I feel the same way at times with, my philosophy on headlines is they need to attract attention, but they also are part of the story. They are that ancillary and sit off to the side. When I worked at the Gazette, there's a Phil Lemoyne reporter there who said, I'm just going to put sex in all my headlines so that I get clicks, because there's no other way people can read these support stories. He's covering the State House, and that's just not going to get the clicks that the Iowa Hawkeye football team will get, but yet they're talking about your taxes all the time.
He still is covering the State House. If we wanted to have the best headline, we'd write Kirk Ferentz naked. I think there is particularly in the digital space, it's a competition for attention. Let's get this, look here, or 5 things you need to know. And they appeal to kind of your curiosity. We struggle with the process question. I get this in print a lot too, because there are times where reporters write for headlines, and there's times where someone who did not write the story writes a headline. And it's kind of an intersection where you can introduce factual errors, you can have a little bit different take on what the sensitivity is or the nuance. The city of Cedar Rapids is especially sensitive to this. They love to critique some of the adjectives that we use in our headlines. And so we get that in a lot of different ways. And the challenge, from a practical standpoint, this isn't to make excuses, but there are times where you're trying to convey an awful lot of detail or nuance in fewer than the 145 characters or 280 characters that you have in the book. And the space to do that is even less. And so sometimes I think there's a tendency to try and get too cute. And that is something that doesn't play at all online. And so the headline plays a lot of different functions. And we've struggled with that. You're not alone in the feeling betrayed. I feel betrayed by a lot of headlines, and I still fall for the stupid trick to check this. Look here, 5 things that you need to know. Let me share those.
I'm with you. I hate those headlines. A lot of times they're pretty misleading. It's clear that there's much as you click on them in about 10 seconds, you figure out it was misleading just to get you to click, and then you feel sort of taken or tricked or something. The best thing is to don't click, but of course then you always worry, like, what if this is the time and it's true? I hate the headlines like 5 things you need to know. I never click on that because I'm convinced that I never really need to know those 5 things. But I think the best overall solution is to find better news sources. If you go to a different site, people play with headlines less on some sites than others. Of course, you have to make sure it's not an ad for that site. You can get good news sites that's really terrible ads. And to the gentleman in the back, so we don't leave your question hanging, it sounds like what you're suggesting is a sort of freedom of speech kind of Civil Rights Act. In other words, it's not just against the government. Employers can't fire you for your free speech, just like they can't fire you for your religious beliefs or for your race or national origin or something like that. It's interesting. I mean, if it applied against, there are very little of this, right? As Joe mentioned at the beginning, not only does the First Amendment only apply to governments now, it originally only applied to the federal government. That's one reason why there is a freedom of speech in the Iowa Constitution, because the First Amendment in the U.S. Constitution didn't stop the government of Iowa from infringing on your right to freedom of speech. You relied on your Iowa Constitution for that. So in general, the rights are against governments. They're not against private entities. NFL players probably wish they were against private entities too, although I think the NFL has been fairly, what's the way to put it, cognizant of the fact that the average American has a certain value that they need to share. So even if the First Amendment doesn't apply against NFL owners, they seem that that's part of the country's mores and they're interested in following that. But I think you have to consider the implications. I think, first of all, the main thing that I would tell you is that there are lots and lots of lawsuits filed under the Civil Rights Act, and while I think it's a good bargain on the whole, if you make it apply to free speech and employers too, now you're going to have that number of lawsuits multiplied. So I think unless you really like attorneys, you might not actually like how it works in practice.
All right, I think that's a good note to end on. I appreciate the gentleman who gave your time tonight, and when saying Jack Earl, if you can, there's certainly some